Let's make it a start. It's already 3:15. I know it's day 3. This venue is also a little far from the Dolphin, and I'm sure people are tired, but hope we are going to make this interesting for everyone. We come from a more practitioner view, so you will hear a little more on how things are being done on the ground rather than what choices you can make. So let me start. So EXL, we recently completed 25 years. We recently launched our own LLM, which gave us a lot of boost in our market cap. But let me start with our esteemed panelists, because that's who are the people who are making difference. So Joe Richard, he's our digital CTO. Naveen, I would say who owns the Valley, and he has his own startups he has sold. He's an senior advisor in BCG. He is a board member of Extension and was an ex-chief customer officer at Prudential. And finally, we have Srini. And Srini is from Republic, and Republic, is doing a lot of cool stuff in AI. And I'm sure Srini will touch some of that. Srini, I don't know if you want to start.
Yeah, Republic, as you know, it's a big waste management, recycling. So recycling is one of the key aspects, and the CEO was on the CNBC last week. One of the use cases he mentioned, which was pretty close to my heart, is when the trucks go to pick up trash, we actually can find how much contamination in that using AI visual cameras. And that's critical for us because it's going to help the customer, it's going to help the environment. So a lot of cool stuff, and we'll talk more in terms of some of the work on GenAI.
All right. So what we thought was, last year we were here in Gartner. We actually met Republic here in Gartner. And here we are a year down the line. We have use cases in production. I'm sure Srini is going to touch upon some of that. But what we are seeing is, last year people were figuring out use cases, POCs, experimentation. But this year the discussion has moved into value and what values GenAI can drive. And we are actually seeing a lot of people are also talking about value drift, because as people have gone into production, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, people are seeing sometimes value erosion happening over time. Now, why that's happening? And we believe that is happening because people still haven't, I would say, mastered the art of managing the complete life cycle. Applications, softwares, people really know how to do DevOps, how do you do managed services. But when it comes to GenAI, that's still relatively new. And this balance between cost, latency, accuracy, privacy is a very, very fine balance. So the concept of value drift, why does it even exist? Because, for example, if you had implemented something in a contact center, you got a result of reduction of 50 seconds, great in the POC, maybe even in production the first 3 months. But suddenly you had LLM, which was OpenAI, and that gets slower. Suddenly the calls will start to get abandoned because you had adjusted your staffing, right? So the value will start to drift away from what your business case was. And it's a very important thing for people to start thinking about as you start to scale and put multiple use cases in production. But I'll go back to our panelists, because I'm sure they are hearing a lot and they're doing a lot of this in their day-to-day work. But let me start with Naveen. Naveen, as you're talking to a lot of people in the Valley and your connects, are people really concerned about value, or do they still believe that GenAI is going to give them all the benefits they hope for?
Yeah, Sumit, what I'll say is that as you think about kind of the excitement around AI, I would say it's absolutely still there. When I'm talking to boards or investors or even the C-suite execs, everybody believes in the value of AI, right? And if you think about this, step back, if you're going to change how intelligence comes to us, you're going to democratize intelligence, that's a profound way to think about what technology can do for us. So obviously, that has a very important impact conversation. If you think about kind of technologies that are called what now technologies. So in our lifetimes, internet came in the decade of 95 to 2005, when internet actually came in, went up, went down in 2000 during the dot-com, and then came back up again. So that was a decade of internet. 2005 to 2015 was the decade of mobile. And it started with BlackBerry, and then Steve Jobs did his seminal 2007 presentation of iPhone that changed the world, right? So 2005 to 2015 was about mobile. So now we had access to knowledge. We had access to knowledge 24/7. From 2015 to 2000 now, there has been a little bit of a lull in the context of new technology. But what we haven't recognized is this has also been the time where absorption of technology has been at its greatest. So anyone from a company person, an employee, to a 3-year-old, to a 90-year-old grandmother, everybody's using technology now. So that 10 years has been seminal in terms of how we think about technology. The reason I bring it up is the impact of generative AI, the excitement of generative AI will give results over the next 15 years. So if we step back and look at life 15 years from now, you will realize that it has massively changed how we think about the world, how we think about technology, how we think about productivity. And it's really important to keep yourself grounded in that. So it will come, impact will come, but there's going to be a time story. I want to go to a quick slide and then we're going to move on. So this is a slide I presented to Fortune 100, 10 CIOs and CTOs. If you look at the left of the slide, all the questions are about strategy, about thinking about AI. And when you go to the right, you start thinking about questions in the context of how are you implementing it? Like, can you implement it? Okay, sir.
You can keep it.
All good? All right. So if you think about the impact, the questions are on the right. And what you notice is the dots on the first side, on the left side, are all around 3, 4, and 5. But the dots on the right-hand side are all around 1, 2, and 3. So companies are still, to your point, Sumit, looking at how do I make an execution, the value erosion point that you made, how do we get into that? So that's something that's happening now. But what I would say is, when I talk to the C-suite, everybody's excited except a 1%. Do you know who that is? Is the CIO, exactly, because of the complexity of it.
All right. So let's move, Srini, from your experience in deployment and operations. Are there any challenges you went through because you had a successful deployment? And I'm sure no project in at least IT, I can say, can ever be smooth and seamless, right? But what are the challenges right from the ideation stage to where you are today?
Yeah, I think if you look at GenAI, it's kind of like the iPhone movement, right? Where it's, wow, it's a great technology. Okay, what are the different use cases? 10 years fast forward, you see so many use cases coming out as part of it. I think with GenAI, you kind of see that. I mean, if you look at it, there's a lot of hype, but there's also reality in terms of some of the use cases where you can take GenAI and really kind of take that into action. Like the way Google made it easy for us to find information, GenAI is making it easy to consume information, make it consumable, but also make it smarter, right? Make us smarter in terms of how do you access some of that information. If you really look at some of the use cases, and something we went through is like, how do you eliminate the noise and focus on the signals, right? What are the right use cases you want to go after? You need to get your business partners as part of the conversation early on. And something we have done is, as you look at some of these use cases, where do you want to start? What are some of the right use cases you want to get started? There are 4 C's you can think of. One of them is, how do you improve the customer interaction? Like, how do you make it easy from a customer perspective? The other one is the knowledge workers, right? How do I build a system that has a lot of knowledge that I can interact and do a lot of Q&A as part of it? Coding is definitely the easy one when you see that a lot these days. And also from creative and some of the information that you want to create. But I think the key thing personally for me is, how do you identify those right sort of use cases? What are driving the business outcomes? And if you can filter through all the noise and find the right use cases and prioritize it based on that, you bring your business along the journey. You get a combination of the right IT leadership teams, your business teams, the right SMEs into the discussion, your data science and some of the LLM experts. And then you go through the POC phase, right? Something that we have done through is find the right use cases, start with the right POC, scale the solution to a pilot, and then get to a production. So there are stages in which you need to go through it. But I think the more important piece is you need to eliminate all those experimentation that goes in all the time. So pick the right ones, go through the scale, and identify the solution that can make it a big impact as part of it.
All right, thanks, Srini. Joe, coming to you from an engineering standpoint, there are choices. In GenAI, it's not that you could just do one architecture or one tech stack for everything. So what choices will ensure that the value is continuously going back to the business?
So
as Srini was highlighting, you got to pick your use cases. Well, we all know use cases are going to change over time, right? So does technology. So you've got to do a few things to kind of set yourself up for success. The first one is you've got to build your solutions on an architecture that can not only scale and is efficient, but can be flexible, right? You're going to probably swap out that architecture completely over the next 1 to 2 years because the technology is going to change. So make sure you build something that's flexible. The other big thing is, as the use cases and data change over time, you need to notice when that change is impacting value before your users do. So the monitoring that you do of the system is going to be critical. And it's not just enough to, you can monitor the costs and know I'm overspending. That's easy. But to monitor a model, you have to collect the data, but you have to process that data in such a way that you can draw insights out of it. And that's going to probably require other models. So it's a lot of the things you're hearing about here, these guardian agents, monitoring agents, and all those things going on. How can you implement that in an efficient, effective way so that you can be predictive? That's going to be the key to protecting the value.
All right. Let's move and go a little double click on some of the essential elements. Data. Now, we all know data is the fuel for AI. And a lot of unstructured data right now, or at least in the past, has not been in the best shape or form or looked at. Srini, but when you looked at the use cases you were deploying, how did you manage that complexity of data?
Yeah, I think data is still key, and I believe GenAI is going to put a lot of pressure on data because, as you see RAG and some of the other frameworks, bad data in, bad data out, right? Bad analysis out, which means your data has to be ready. And if your data is not ready, your business is not ready for generative AI, right? It's that simple as that. So I think data is going to be one of the key elements within your organization that you need to take care of. If you go with the simple synopsis, like garbage in, garbage out, your AI model is going to be as good as the data you put into the system. So you can't expect 100% accuracy on the model when the data is only 50% accurate, right? So it's going to be critical to put the right safeguards in place as you go through. Personally, for us, it's a journey. I mean, you kind of start off. It's not to go for the right data, but it's always like you have so much data in the organization. Don't go for perfection day one, right? Start identifying a certain data sets. Take care of some of those right data sets that you can put the right governance process in place. Something that we also did when we initially did our initial POC and pilots, we picked a medium complex use case. We didn't go for the highest complex use case or the easiest one. We picked somewhere in the middle. And the reason for that too is we wanted to get a sizable value at the end of the pilot and the POC. But also when we wanted to go into a pilot, we wanted to identify an area where we had high good quality data. So that was a criteria. So we kind of filtered through some of these use cases, identified the right data sets, identified the right use cases that can go with the right data sets. So it was kind of a combination that we looked at across the board. So it's definitely important for having the right data. And I think as in the picture here, I think the biggest thing is the right data governance within the organization. Like, do you have the right governance? Do you have the right tools from a quality perspective? Are you measuring the quality of data coming in, right? And you put the monitoring in place as the data comes in, because what if you have a model that's deployed with the data that you expect is really good, but something happens upstream, then your model starts to perform pretty bad at the end, right? So how do you make sure you control the process across the board? And especially when you scale up the system to production, the more observability becomes a lot key aspect at that point. So I think the governance is key, the quality. I mean, some of the basic data management principles you go through are definitely important. And I would say it's the strongest pillar, I mean, that on which your generative AI can really stand up. And if you have a shaky foundation of data management, then definitely your GenAI solutions will be having a big problem.
All right. So I know Srini touched upon data, but let's imagine we have all the right data, we have all the data management practices, but you still have to manage the complexity of getting the LLMs and the real value with engineering. And those choices are changing every now and then. Something else new is coming. So Joe, how do you think those choices will need to be managed? Because you can't keep constantly changing everything.
I don't see why not. That's what we know. Yeah, you've got to be careful. You can't change too rapidly because then you inject risk into the system, and that's a bad thing. But if you start with the data, the most important thing to do is to mask that complexity of the data from your applications. The more you can do that, the easier it's going to be for applications to be stable. And while it'd be great if you can create the perfect data lake and put everything in one place, we all know that's not possible, right? So the concept that I'm seeing a lot of people use that I encourage is this idea of a virtual system of record. The app doesn't care where the data is. It just needs to know that's the data I need. So you can leave data where it is and just put that layer, that virtual layer in front of it, so you have a system of record and the app gets the data it needs quickly and easily, and then you can manage that thin layer, right? So that's one thing. On the outside of it, it's really listen to your users and make sure that the application you're building is meeting the user's needs today and tomorrow. I mean, that's always going to be the challenge. And then the last one's going to be you have to prioritize. You're going to have to make hard calls. You can't do everything. So try to pick the one or two things that will have the biggest impact and just do those really well. And this is not new concepts. You're just doing the same thing, just to a new set of technology.
All right. So let's change gears and actually get into operationalization, because value actually comes in only when you are able to operationalize stuff. And Srini, I'll go back to you since you have done operationalization. So where did you think the real value coming from, and what was your experience in getting it operationalized?
Yeah, so just a little bit of background. We looked at different use cases, as I was mentioning, like we looked across the organization, what would be the right use cases from an AI and especially GenAI perspective. Customer service is one of the areas we looked at, especially because it's one of those areas where it's a data intensive, it's information or knowledge intensive. We work with the team, we work through our different areas, and I think if you look at, and if you are dealing with customer service, majority of the time, right, is spent to find information. Like if you look at a customer service agent, we call it the average call handling time, and we looked at different scenarios, different categories. The top categories are always going to be the interesting ones, like why does it take 5 to 6 minutes to answer the call? And as we started to break down some of those use cases, we found out that majority, almost like 50% of the time, is information retrieval. Like where does my information lie? How do I find it? And we started to spend some time with our customer service agents, and we found out that the experience is almost similar to Google, where you have a list of items that show up. The agents have to click through each one of them, control F it, find that information. And sometimes the documents are multi-pages, like hundreds of pages long, which means it's really difficult. And you have a customer on the other line, right? Which means you need to interact with the customers while you're finding this information. It's super challenging, right? And for us, it's like, hey, can that be a perfect scenario where GenAI could be a great value add? Like, can I bring this technology in instead of an agent having to click through like 100 links or 50 links or find information? And sometimes these documents go back to the data quality thing. If the quality of the input is bad, like information says something at the top and something at the bottom, like the agent has to really understand all these pieces as they go through it. So we actually worked with them. We identified that as we took one of the categories and said, let's go down this path of building this use case. So we did an initial pilot or POC with the customers, customer service agents, and we were able to see some immediate impact, right? Using GenAI, simple summarization, answering the questions to the point. So the agent doesn't have to go to like multiple places, has one place to find that information. And then we did a pilot in a small location, as I said, find the location where we have good quality data to a certain degree. It's not like 50% bad. So we definitely looked at some high quality data locations. We did a pilot. It ran super successfully. A lot of people were excited as part of it. We got a lot of good feedback. We work with our IT partners to make sure we have the solution that can scale from a pilot perspective, just enough so that we can put the solution out there to test it. So once after we exited the pilot, we said, let's go scale the solution. And that's where we went through the journey. And I think especially when you start going down the path of taking a solution which runs great in pilot to production, there's a lot of safeguards you need to have in place, right? The observability is one thing we talked about. Having an LLM ops solution or ML ops, like how do I scale the solution from a speed of making this solution available from a high scale, like all agents to a few agents. Change management is a key aspect that we looked at, which is, and we started early on, like even when we started to do a POC and a pilot, We involved the business teams right at that point, bring in the right subject matter experts who can guide us as we went through this process. They told us which ones working well, which areas was not great, and how do we improve the process along the journey. Bringing the right stakeholders to the conversation, and the same thing with all the IT leadership. So we brought in all the right teams to the conversation early on, and that was super effective and useful when we started to scale it, because a lot of lessons learned was kind of evaluated at the time of the pilot. And I think the biggest thing I can think of is the technology is changing so fast, right? Like, models are getting better, faster. Like, some of the challenges are to be a technology challenge or use cases. It's hard to solve today, but a few months from now, you'll have an LLM that has that capability available, or speed and scenarios like that. So we started to learn a lot, but I think it's fail fast is a great scenario where test out some of the scenarios early on, build some solutions, take them to a few customers, and then filter through the noise in terms of finding the right use cases that you can scale and make them impactful from a production perspective. So I think it's a journey. So you need to start with taking some of the right steps along the way.
All right. Thanks, Srini. And I'll also share some experience we had. So one of the learnings we have had is, unless you can embed AI into operational workflow, you will not get the real benefit. So in the use case which Srini mentioned, the final outcome was embedded within Salesforce, so people were not toggling between screens. They got where they were using rest of the information. And that's the first feedback we saw coming from the agents, and saying, it's great, I don't need to go anywhere else. I can see everything in the operational workflow. And I think there's a larger Republic team who contributed to some of this, Preeti, Jeff, who are in the room. But I think, let me go back, Naveen, on the operationalization question, because the successful companies will only be differentiated if they can get the value.
Yep.
And it's going to be complex, it's going to be hard, but they will still be successful companies. So where do you think companies should do, and what the CIOs should be doing?
Yeah, I mean, I love what Srini said. I think it's the clarity in terms of your business outcome enabled through technology and AI is the core goal. So companies that can align the organization, change management is a part of it, into that framework is quite critical. And I think of it as there are three kinds of AIs companies are integrating. So there's productivity AI, like, when you have a co-pilot. So that's one kind of an AI. And that requires wide, engagement of non-tech workers inside your organization to get value out of it. Second part is, I think, embedded AI. The AI that comes from Salesforce, your CRM, your healthcare system, that is very functionally deep, and you need to, again, have very domain-specific understanding and learning of that. And the third that we spend quite a bit of time on is the use cases, which are very business-specific. I have a framework for that very quickly. It's called DRIVE, and D is for data, and you'll hear this over and over again. Data is so important. R is around ROI. How do you think about ROI? I is around infrastructure investment. How do you invest and where you invest is quite critical. I think V is in the context of variety of models. Not just one model. You will live in a world, there'll be lots of models. And how you get your teams used to that fact is quite critical. And E is about engagement, which is how do you engage a broad set of stakeholders. So DRIVE, drive.
Okay, nice. We have got a new framework, drive. Okay, so Joe, let me come back to you on your final thoughts on what does a CIO, CTO from an engineering standpoint needs to do to ensure that the value is, you get the value and you are able to sustain the value.
Exactly. So I kind of hit some of that on the first question. As an architect, the architecture, I think, is the foundation. If you don't have a good architecture, everything you build on it is going to fall apart. But you have to have one that's going to scale. You got to make sure it can scale out, make sure it's flexible. But one of the points that Naveen made that I want to harp on is that the ability to use multiple models. Because what we're finding in a lot of the activities we're doing is one model will take you 75% of the way there. But that's not good enough. You may need 2, 3 models working together in an orchestrated way to get 100%. And what I encourage you to do is not settle for the 75%. when just a little bit more engineering efforts, you can get it the rest of the way. So don't be afraid of using multiple models. I also believe that this is not a place where bigger is better. The larger the model doesn't mean it's better. Because all you need the model to do is work in your use case where you want to use it. And sometimes a smaller model will be more efficient, more cost effective in that particular case than the very large, trillions of parameter models out there, right? They're good for general use cases, but none of you have a general problem. You have a specific problem you're trying to do in a specific point. So find the right answer for that area is what I encourage you to do from an engineering point of view. And then you said the integration. Because if it doesn't integrate into your workflows, no one's going to use it. So just some thoughts.
So let me also, so this is a value at scale formula we started to, I would say, experience. One, and this is something which Srini mentioned on, are you selecting the right scalable use cases? That's going to be super important because we saw 50% of the POCs not going through to full-scale production because they were just wrong use cases. You can't, for example, if you want to use a GenAI use case on a two-people process, it's cool to show, but you are never going to put that in production. Data quality we spoke about, and I think Joe made a very interesting comment on don't try to, while ideal situation would be you have a data lake which has everything, which is what a lot of the data companies are going to tell you, but you can't wait for that to happen in the next 2-3 years. You got to do where the data is, get access, get your model access to that data with the right securities, and that should be good, but you still need to have data quality management on an ongoing basis. Third important point, which Joe just briefly, you have to have focus on the architecture, on the responsible AI, on the choice of models. Multi-language models is okay, but you need to be focusing on the engineering. Srini touched upon change management and adoption, and how do you integrate that into the workflow. And finally, I think we touched upon it briefly on MLOps, LLMOps. I think that's very key to sustain the value. And we believe if we can do this right, then the multiplier effect will get you always the right value which you're forecasting as a business. But before we wrap up, I know we have a couple of minutes. This would be a fireside, 2 points if you had to tell how to get value from GenAI. Joe.
I've hit all mine, so architecture and integration.
Okay. Naveen?
I would say build a shed, don't build a house. And there are a lot of kind of metaphors that tie to that, which is you need the space, but let's not start building a full house. Let's have low integration, easy installation. Let's get it done in 3 days and not spend 3 years building it.
Yeah, I would say the two things would be prioritize, like pick the right use cases, because sometimes when you stress test some of these use cases, you see there's not a huge value. So you need to go through the filtering process. The second one is AI governance. I mean, we didn't talk much about it, but start the process early on, right? Go through the process, bring the right team together. I think the benefit for us having the right AI governance is it becomes a lot easier when you start thinking about scaling. For me, that is almost like brakes in a car. It doesn't let you go slow. It actually makes you go faster, right? So it kind of helps you to go faster and have the right AI governance, even though it's a starting process. Get the process started early on when you're doing a POC.
Yeah. So closing comments from me would be, I think as long as we are focused on the value, GenAI is great. It's going to make our lives much more easier. But if we move away and focus on the tech, I think it'll all be a disaster. So focus on the value, and GenAI is great. Thank you.